Bill Dalton drove up to the house and looked at the two-story structure. He once considered this place his home, but over the past few months, it has become his personal hell due to his uncaring wife, Sarah. He once loved this woman and was ready to do anything to make her happy. That's why he worked so hard. But now this love has been destroyed and replaced by disgust and hatred. 3.5 months ago, he returned home from a grueling 12-hour day at Olsen Enterprises, where he worked as an account executive, to hear from his wife that she was bored. Therefore, he had to become her slave, and from that moment on she called him slave, never addressing him by name. That first night, she placed restrictions on his actions and forced him to perform strange tasks. She demanded that he prepare dinner for her and serve her in bed. Hoping to regain her favor, he complied. But it didn't work. In fact, things only got worse, as Sarah spent her days coming up with new ways to torture, humiliate, and abuse her. Now he had to work 12 hours a day and then come home and do all the household chores. If he wanted clean clothes, he had to wash them. If he wanted a clean house, he had to clean. If he wanted to eat, he had to cook. And then he had to satisfy his wife's humiliating desires in bed. Many nights he stayed up until 3 a.m., only to get up at 6:30 to start all over again. Sometimes he didn't sleep at all. There were times when he did not sleep for almost 3 days in a row. And every day it got worse. She took his ATM and credit cards, leaving him with just enough money for gas and food. He learned to save, saving a few dollars in hopes of one day keeping Sarah forever. She then decided that he was not worthy of eating at the dinner table, even though he cooked all the meals and did all the housework. Then her behavior reached the edge. It became unbearable. He begged her, and made promises, but Sarah refused to listen. She made it clear that his job was to bring home the money and serve her in whatever sick and twisted way she liked, no questions asked. One day he was sitting at his desk and noticed that his hands were shaking. He looked around his office and looked at pictures of him and his wife in happier times. It was then that he realized that he had become what he hated most, a weakling. He never raised his voice to his wife or asserted his rights in marriage. Everything he did was to please her, but it was all in vain. He talked to lawyers and got some bad news. He lived in a state where there were no fault divorces, and to make matters worse, the courts were heavily against men. Sarah would receive at least half of his salary for the next 3 years, and he would have to maintain the house and pay utilities. She would also receive half of his retirement savings and at least half of their total assets. He did the math. This would leave him with almost nothing, practically forcing him to live in his car. The only other choice was to simply endure the abuse, since, he was told, authorities rarely, if ever, took action against abusive wives. Worst of all, according to the lawyer, Bill would become an even bigger laughingstock because his plight would become public knowledge. He even thought about ending his life several times, but realized that Sarah would benefit from his $500,000 insurance policy. He thought about killing her, but didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Plus, he really didn't think he could do something so drastic. He read some stories online to see what other men in his situation had done, but realized he didn't have access to the resources he would need to get out of the relationship. Many of the stories were entertaining, and some were downright crazy, but he realized that there would be no special forces, trained assassins, or ancient mythical goddesses of justice to save him at the last moment. He shook his head at some of the comments left by readers. In short, he was doomed, with no way out. Walking into the private restroom of his office, he looked at himself in the mirror and did not recognize the man who was looking back at him. Although he was never pumped up or muscular, he always tried to take good care of himself. But the man in the mirror looked like a shell of himself and noticed that he had lost some of his muscle mass. "What's going on?" he asked himself. He was once a fairly successful account executive who was respected wherever he went. Now he was just wimpy Bill, caught in a loveless, sexless marriage with a vixen who had no respect or love for him. Her violence left him hungry, weak, emasculated, and shaking. And now his work began to suffer, and others noticed. Bill stood up and threw the photos in the trash. It's over now, he told himself. That night, he came home to find a motorcycle in the living room and a big, dirty, fat man sitting on his couch with Sarah. They looked at him when he entered. "Oh, hi, slave," Sarah said. "This is Bruno. Now he will live with us. Now go make us dinner and mind your own business." The long-haired, dirty guy laughed. "Yes, go serve your mistress while I'm with her," Bruno said. They laughed as Bill brought Bruno a beer. By this time, Bill had had enough. Furious, he went upstairs, and while the two were busy, he took his ATM and credit cards from Sarah's bag and left the house. Sarah and Bruno stopped when they saw him leave. Bruno and Sarah tried to stop him. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked. "I said that you must follow my orders if you want me to be happy, and you disobeyed me. Being with Bruno makes me happy, and you have to do whatever he says, understand?" "Crap, take it," said Bill. "Now you are an accomplice. I'm calling the police." "Damn you, you won't call the police on me. Now you're really going to pay," she said. Returning home, Sarah and Bruno humiliated him in every way. He loved Sarah selflessly, and this is how she decided to repay him. The next day, he was allowed to take a shower and go to work. "Bring home a lot of money for Bruno and I to spend," Sarah said. "Yes, and bring some beer," Bruno added. "I'm almost out." Bill said nothing as he left the house, and the two traders laughed. Bill went to the coffee room and grabbed a cup of coffee and a donut, the only thing he had eaten since yesterday, when suddenly his boss, Mike Olson, walked up to him. "Bill, is everything okay?" he asked. "You don't look good." Bill looked at his boss, the man who founded the company and hired him years ago. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Maybe you should go home and rest," Mike said. Bill's eyes widened. "No, I can't go home," he said, the pain in his chest getting worse. He suddenly felt nauseous, and the pain began to spread to his arm. His vision blurred, and he collapsed on the floor, spilling his coffee. He knew he was having a heart attack and prayed that death would take him as soon as possible and free him from the hell that Sarah had created. The next thing he knew, he was in the back of the ambulance, looking up at the paramedic's face. My chest still hurt, but it was a different kind of pain. It was the kind of pain that often comes after CPR, and it was the pain he felt for months afterwards. Bill later learned that paramedics not only performed CPR on him, but also used a defibrillator twice before his heart started working again. "I'm fine, just a little tired," Bill croaked. The paramedic shook his head. "No, you're not okay," he said. "We almost lost you twice. We're taking you to Mercy Hospital, and the doctors there will get you cleaned up. Hang in there, buddy." The ambulance arrived at the hospital, and Bill was quickly transferred to a room where doctors and nurses began working. After he was given fluids to stabilize the system and x-rayed, he was moved to another room where the doctor explained that he was going to place a stent. When Bill woke up again, he was in another room, and his mouth was dry. Unable to speak, he made a sign that he was thirsty and was given pieces of ice to suck on. The nurse gave him something for the pain, and he went back to sleep. When he woke up again, his mouth was still dry, and he was given more pieces of ice. He looked around the room and saw his boss, Mike Olson, looking at him with concern. "We're all praying for you, Bill," he said. "Listen, your wife and some guy came a little earlier to find out what happened. She didn't look happy. Are you all right?" Bill shook his head, horror in his eyes. He tried to tell Mike to keep her away, but he couldn't speak clearly. "No," he croaked. "She made it." Mike was now very concerned about Bill, who was more than just an employee to him. Bill was one of its first executive directors and worked hard to make the company successful. Mike owed him a lot and promised himself to do everything possible for the man he considered a friend and colleague. "What do you mean she did it?" Mike asked. Bill tried to grab Mike's shirt and looked at him pleadingly. "Look, maybe in a day or two I'll bring Ralph Stimson over, and we can talk more about this, okay?" Mike suggested. Bill nodded. Ralph was a corporate security specialist who also served as a corporate psychologist and consultant. He often helped employees overcome stressful situations at work and was highly respected by everyone. The doctor entered the room and checked Bill's vital signs. He looked at Bill's chart before examining him. He sat up and looked at Bill, concerned on his face. "Mr. Dalton, I think you'll be fine, but we're going to leave you here for a few days to make sure. While I'm here, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind," he said. "What?" asked Bill. "Go ahead and ask, Doctor. I'm Bill's boss and his friend. Whatever you want to say, you can say it in front of me," Mike said. The doctor looked at Bill. "Is this okay with you, Mr. Dalton?" he asked. Bill nodded and said quietly, "Yes." "Very good. We noticed when you were brought in that you appeared to have been, abused. We also noticed some abnormalities in your blood work. I don't want to intrude on your privacy, but I would like to understand what happened." Bill's eyes began to fill with tears, and he began to sob. Mike consoled him as best he could. The doctor sat back and took notes. He continued once Bill had calmed down a bit. "I guess things aren't going well at home, are they?" asked the doctor. Bill shook his head. "Look, we're not here to judge you, Mr. Dalton. Your life choices are your business. I'd just like to get an idea of what happened." He looked at Mike. "Honestly, if this was a female patient, I would swear a crime had occurred. All the signs are there." "Oh, God," Mike said. "That explains why he doesn't want to see his wife. Are you serious?" "Absolutely," said the doctor. "I'm actually wondering if we should call the authorities." "From what I've seen, the government in this town is worthless," Mike said. The doctor nodded in agreement. "At best, they will make a report, and it will all be on the evening news. Look, let's keep this a secret for now and see what we can do. Can you keep his wife away from him?" "Yes, we can," said the doctor. He looked at Bill. "Is this what you want?" Bill nodded. "Very good," said the doctor. "I'll make a note about it. If she comes again, we will ask the guards to take her out." "Thank you, doctor," Bill said. The doctor patted his hand. "Please, now rest, okay?" Mike looked at Bill after the doctor left. "Bill, I've been a little worried about you the last couple of months. Others too. Is this what has been bothering you all this time?" he asked. Bill nodded. "Yes," he said. "I understand," Mike said. "Hold on, Bill. We'll figure this out. Now, as the doctor said, rest. Do not worry about a thing. Ralph and I will see you in a day or two." He patted Bill on the shoulder comfortingly and left. Feeling relieved, Bill closed his eyes and fell asleep. That night, Sarah and Bruno returned to visit Bill. The staff in the intensive care unit were unaware of the instructions to keep her away and did not say anything when she entered his room. She looked at the tubes connected to Bill and abruptly threw the blankets off him. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "What is all this nonsense about a heart attack? You didn't have a heart attack. You're just pretending to stay away from home. Get out of this bed immediately. You must cook me dinner and clean the house, slave. Let's move the damn thing." "Yeah, and you should get me a beer, you bastard," Bruno shouted. By this time, Bill had woken up and was overcome with horror. He frantically pressed the button to call a nurse. A nurse passing by the room heard the noise and screams of Sarah. There was a scuffle, which attracted the attention of other nurses, one of whom called security. Soon the guards were in the room and pulled Bruno out. Sarah, however, remained defiant. "Damn it, I'm his wife, and he needs to come home right now and make me dinner," she screamed. "He's faking it. He didn't have a heart attack." Bruno tried to break back into the room, pushing away the guard. "I'll deal with you," he said. "Now get up and get me my damn beer." The police came to the door. They interviewed the guards and nurses before turning to Bill. "Mr. Dalton, do you wish to file a report of assault against these two individuals?" asked the officer. "Lock them up," Bill said decisively. Sarah looked at him with hatred in her eyes. "You scoundrel," she screamed as the officer cuffed her hands behind her back. "I'll remember this for you. You will still know what real pain is." Two officers led them away, and the third approached Bill. He looked at Bill, who was being covered and checked by the nurses. Bill gave him his testimony, omitting what happened earlier. The officer took notes and handed Bill the card. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Dalton, he said. Just know that they will most likely be held for about 96 hours and then released with a fine, if there is anything at all. Our prisons are pretty overcrowded right now, and well, that's how things work in this city. I would suggest you hire a lawyer and get an order of protection from these two. I'm really sorry, sir, I really am. That's how things work here. Bill nodded. Thank you, officer, he said. The policeman patted Bill on the shoulder and left. After the nurses calmed and settled Bill, they gave him more medicine, and he fell asleep. At the end of the second day, Bill was moved to a private room in another part of the hospital. He was beginning to regain his strength and was able to walk down the hallway before returning to bed. The hospital put him on a special cardiac diet and gave him infusions to restore his blood levels. Thanks to Mike, several office staff sent flowers to Bill's hospital room with cards encouraging him to get well soon. He smiled at this. On the third day, he was sitting on his bed watching the news when Mike and Ralph walked into the room. "Hey, Bill," Mike said as he entered the room. "How do you feel?" "Better," Bill replied, almost like a person. "Well, you definitely look better than you did that day," Mike said. Ralph shook his hand and both men sat down next to Bill's bed. "So, Bill, could you tell us what's really going on?" asked Ralph. Bill looked at the two men nervously. "Is what we say here confidential?" he asked. Ralph nodded. "Absolutely," he said. "What is said here remains between us. Think of me as your therapist, okay? The same rules apply as in the case of medical confidentiality." "Okay," Bill said. "I'm pretty embarrassed to talk about all this." "No need, son," Mike said. "We're here to help, but we can't help if we don't know what's going on." "Okay," Bill said. After he gave Ralph permission to record the conversation, he told them about the events of the past 3.5 months, from the moment Sarah made her first statement until the incident in the emergency room that landed her in prison. Ralph stopped several times to ask questions and took notes as he listened to Bill's story. When Bill finished, both men were shocked. "Oh my God, this sounds like one of those stories you read on the internet," Mike said. Ralph smiled. "Yes, I've never heard anything so ridiculous," he said. "So, is there anything we can do?" Mike asked. Ralph thought for a moment before answering. "I have one call to make, but I think we can," he said. "Normally, I would advise hiring a lawyer and filing for divorce, but I think more is needed in this case, especially given the physical and emotional damage Bill has suffered. Divorce is stressful even under the best of circumstances, but this—" "What do you mean?" Mike asked. "I remember a seminar I attended in New York some time ago. The lecturer said that he was working on a special type of treatment specifically designed for cases of severe emotional damage. It hasn't been approved by the FDA or anyone else yet, but he said he's open to looking at cases where there's significant stress. He might be interested in this case," said Ralph. "What are we waiting for?" asked Bill. "Remember, Bill, that if he decides to take your case, it may be expensive, and since this is an experimental treatment, your insurance will not cover it, and there's no guarantee that he'll even agree," Ralph said. "Don't worry about the cost," Mike said. "I'll pay for everything." "Okay," said Ralph. "I'll make a few calls and get back to you. In the meantime, Bill, I'd like to come and talk to you one-on-one over the next few days, if that's okay." "I'd like that," Bill said. "Great. Then it's decided. I'll start making calls today when we get back, and hopefully I'll get a response soon," Ralph said, standing up. Mike stood up too. "Are you going to be okay?" Mike asked. Bill nodded. "Yes, I will need to talk to a lawyer and get a protective order," he said. "I'll see what I can arrange. Maybe I can arrange it through someone in the legal department," Mike said. "Thank you," Bill said. He shook their hands and went back to bed after they left. He felt better than he had in weeks. Ralph came in and held impromptu counseling sessions with Bill over the next 3 days, and Mike, true to his word, hired one of the corporate lawyers to apply for a protective order banning Sarah and Bruno from coming within 500 feet of Bill and his place of work. They could stay in the house while Bill was in the hospital or receiving treatment in an inpatient facility, but had to leave as soon as it became known that he would return. The lawyer also suggested that Bill take steps to protect his finances. Mike also brought Bill a laptop from the office. Once connected to the hospital's guest network, Bill logged into his bank account and made a few changes, paying off and closing their joint credit card and transferring half of their funds into a separate account in his name. He arranged for statements and forms to be sent to his work address. Her bank card was still working, so she had access to some funds. The policeman's prediction also turned out to be correct. Sarah and Bruno were held in the county jail for 96 hours, but were released on personal recognizance after the judge determined that neither of them hit Bill. The threats, which were recorded by the hospital's surveillance system, were considered minor. There was no fine, no probation, nothing, even warnings to behave. This was the local justice system. The two offenders were served with a protective order on the day of their release from prison. Finally, the doctors decided that Bill could be discharged. However, Ralph managed to change the order, indicating that Bill would be discharged to a private rehabilitation center due to what he called extreme emotional stress, which he explained as the likely underlying cause of Bill's heart attack. Ralph and Mike came to Bill's room the day before he was discharged. "Good news, Bill," said Ralph. "I talked to the Dr. Steiner, and he agreed to take on your case. You will be transported to his private research center as soon as everything is ready here. According to him, you will stay there for 3 weeks, possibly longer. Mike and I will stop by your house when we leave here, pick up your things, and let your wife know that you will be unavailable for that period of time. Dr. Steiner doesn't want you to have any contact with her while you're under his care. Questions?" "Where is this center?" asked Bill. "It's a good research facility on the shores of Lake Arrowhead," Ralph said. "It has everything you need, including a gym and internet access, and Dr. Steiner says the rooms are very nice." "Do they serve black bean burgers there?" asked Bill. He was already used to them since he ate them in the hospital. Ralph nodded. "I'm sure they can get it. Have you decided to give up meat?" he asked. "No," Bill said, "but I'm going to watch my diet a little better. At the hospital, they serve them as part of the cardiac diet, and I liked them." "Smart move," said Ralph. Bill took off his wedding ring and handed it to Mike. "When you see Sarah, could you give this to her?" he asked. "Tell her I don't need this anymore." Mike took the ring and put it in his pocket. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Bill nodded. "Absolutely. Tell her she can stick it wherever she wants. I'm done with her," Bill said. Mike and Ralph drove to Bill's house to pick up his things. They also wanted to examine the site to make sure they could corroborate his story. As they pulled into the driveway, the first thing they noticed was the unkempt yard that hadn't been spruced up in at least 2 weeks. They knocked and Sarah answered the door, wearing only a robe wrapped tightly around her body. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were red and swollen. Mike had known Sarah for a long time, but he barely recognized the woman who answered the door. "Hey, Sarah, we're here to pick up Bill's things for his rehab," Mike said. Sarah invited them in. The first thing they noticed was the smell. Dirty clothes and oily rags were everywhere. The house looked like it hadn't been cleaned in quite some time. Walking into the kitchen, Ralph saw a large dog bowl containing the moldy remains of what had once been food. He also noticed that the floor around him was covered in stains of moldy food. "Do you have an animal?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm allergic to dogs and cats," she said. "Sometimes Bill brings in stray animals and feeds them." Ralph nodded and looked around a little more. The sink was full of dirty dishes, and there were used pots and pans on the stove. He saw trash from various eateries and figured Sarah didn't cook. He also noticed several strange ingredients on the kitchen table and countertop, as well as a pile of empty soda bottles. Interesting, he thought. Bruno's motorcycle was also parked in the living room on a rather expensive rug. The carpet was stained with tire and oil marks, and tools and oily rags lay next to the motorcycle. "Did you guys bring the beer?" Bruno asked. going down the stairs. "No," Mike said. "We're here to pick up Bill's things. Where are they?" "They're upstairs," Sarah said. "I will show you." She led them upstairs to the guest room. "Doesn't he keep his clothes in the master bedroom?" asked Ralph. No," Sarah said. "After Bruno moved out, I put his things in another room." They went through the closet, grabbing several pairs of jeans, t-shirts, a pair of tennis shoes, and other things Bill might need. Mike went into the master bathroom and grabbed Bill's toiletries. He looked around the master bedroom and what Bill was talking about. The bed was not made, and the whole room stank. He packed 2 suitcases with Bill's belongings and headed back downstairs, Sarah at his heels. "So where will he be? How long will he be gone?" she asked. "I need him to come home and fulfill his duties." "He will be gone for several weeks, and he asked not to tell you where he is. After what happened at the hospital, I think you'll understand," Mike said. "Can I at least call him?" she asked. Mike shook his head. "No, Sarah, he doesn't want to hear from you," he said. Mike took Bill's wedding ring out of his pocket and handed it to Sarah. She accepted it with tears in her eyes. "Bill said he didn't need it anymore. He had other words, but I'll let him tell them to you himself. I just wanted to spice up our marriage," she sobbed, looking at the ring in her hand. "Well, I think you've done enough," Mike said. "Please tell him I love him and I'm sorry," she said. "I'll tell him, but I doubt he'll listen," Mike said. "Goodbye, Sarah." They left Bill's house and headed to the office. They planned to deliver Bill's items the next day before he was discharged. "Have you seen this house?" asked Ralph. Mike nodded. "I've been there many times, had dinner with both of them. They always kept it clean," Mike said. "If I didn't know better, I would have thought Sarah was on illegal substances." Ralph nodded. "I'm inclined to agree. These ingredients look pretty suspicious in the kitchen," said Ralph. "I can't help but wonder if Bruno is cooking something there. It sure looked pretty explosive. Maybe I'll ask the guards to keep an eye on the house. If there really are illegal substances involved, we'll have to get the authorities involved," Mike said. Ralph chuckled. "Yeah, and they can give them a fine and tell them not to do it again, right?" he asked. "Right," Mike said in response. The next day, they went to the hospital to see Bill off. They handed him his suitcases and told him what they had seen in his house. Bill shook his head. "Sarah said she loved you and only wanted to spice up the marriage," Mike said. Bill laughed. "I dread to think what she would do if she hated me," he said. "This marriage is over. I'm done with her. I will file for divorce as soon as possible. I'm over it." It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the nurse came to discharge Bill's documents. After she went through all the instructions, she gave him a heart-shaped pillow and showed him how to hold it on his chest when he stood up or sat down. She also gave him his prescriptions and advised him that he might feel chest compressions for a while. After this, Bill was lowered into the lobby in a wheelchair where he saw a white van with the sign Arrowhead. 2 orderlies in blue coats moved Bill into the van, where he said goodbye to Mike and Ralph. "Thank you for everything," he said, shaking their hands. "Cheers," Mike said. "Just get better and go home, okay? If you need anything, let me know." With Bill safely in the van, the paramedics got in and drove out. An hour later, they arrived at the center. The orderlies wheeled Bill inside, where he was greeted by a short, balding man with a large mustache. Smiling, he shook Bill's hand. "Welcome," he said in a slight German accent. "I am Dr. Franklin Steiner, and I will be treating you. Come on, let's start. The orderlies took your things to your room." The third orderly pushed Bill's wheelchair as he followed the doctor into the large, beautifully decorated office. After the chair was secured, the orderly left the office. Dr. Steiner took out a folder and placed it on his desk. "I have had the opportunity to look into your case, and I am confident that we can help you," he said. "My only concern is your cardiac health, but the hospital says it will be fine if we take it slow. Let me make one thing clear. This treatment is not yet approved by the FDA, but we have approval to conduct human trials. That means it's all experimental. But it will work, right?" asked Bill. Dr. Steiner shook his head. Oh yes, it will work. We just need to approach your case with great care. Before we begin, I need you to fill out these forms and sign the document at the end. This is a formality, but due to the experimental nature of our treatment, it is absolutely necessary, he said. Basically, this means that you understand that this is an experimental treatment and do not hold us responsible for any unexpected results or reactions. Bill filled out the forms, read the waivers carefully, and signed them. Dr. Ken Steiner checked everything before explaining his treatment. Let me explain exactly what we are going to do. I understand that you have been subjected to serious sexual stress from your wife, correct? He asked. Bill nodded. Now you feel insecure, scared, and violated as a result, right? Bill nodded again. And you need a way to, how can I put it, make amends with yourself, reclaim your masculinity, and deal with those who have wronged you. Am I right? That's basically it, Doctor, Bill said. Dr. Steiner nodded his head vigorously. Let me try to explain my hypothesis in simple English, said the doctor. This should help you understand what exactly we want to achieve. Each of us has various defense mechanisms that help us cope with extreme situations. Sometimes we turn to an alternative version of ourselves, what can be described as an alter ego, if you like. This alter ego can manifest itself in different ways. A usually quiet, inconspicuous person can suddenly become loud, arrogant, and overbearing, for example. Those who are not familiar with this person's behavior will suddenly have a completely different opinion about him or her. From what I've been told, you are that kind of person. Ralph says that you are usually very friendly, open, and try to please others. You do not seek to create problems and try to resolve conflicts peacefully. I'm right, he asked. Bill nodded in agreement. The same applies to your wife. You loved her so much that you were willing to go to any lengths in hopes that she would return to her old self. But that didn't happen, right? Asked the doctor. Bill shook his head. Over time, her behavior became more and more extravagant. You reacted as usual, but ended up overwhelmed by her new and extravagant behavior. This, of course, came as a shock to you, as this was out of the norm for her. I'm right? Asked the doctor. Yeah, that's basically it, Bill said. In other words, her alter ego took over in response to what she perceived as a problem in the marriage. Instead of dealing with her problems in her usual loving way, she allowed the beast within to take over. In short, the woman you married is gone, replaced by a completely different person, the complete opposite of the one you previously knew. So we need to release the inner beast in you. Right now, you probably feel like a wimp. This is fine. We need to hide the weakness, at least for a while, and let your inner beast come out until the source of your stress goes away, he said. There is one thing you should know, said the doctor. In some of our other tests, the beast within actually caused physical changes in the subject. They are not constant, but can be unpredictable and in some cases quite significant. What physical changes do you mean? Asked Bill. Significant increases in bone and muscle mass along with logarithmic increases in strength are not unusual. We have seen other side effects, but they seem to be related to the subject's unique situation, the doctor said. You don't go green or anything like that. This only happens in movies, he added, laughing. If I really change like this, what happens next? Asked Bill. In our experience, as soon as the source of stress disappears, the beast, so to speak, also leaves, never returning. However, those who have experienced physical changes say they are coping with problems much better than before and seem to be in better overall health than before the changes, the doctor said. So what now? Asked Bill. Well, it's getting late, so I'll introduce you to your personal staff and we'll get you settled in for the night. I want to take blood and urine to do overnight tests, and I want to get a full set of x-rays. We'll start you on enrollment 4 tonight with saline and other prep medications and begin our work tomorrow morning around 6:30. I want to conduct a deep hypnotherapy session to understand the full nature of your problem, he said. It will take at least 3 hours in the morning. After this, I want to do a full body scan and run some tests to assess your fitness. Once we have completed this, we can plan the rest of the treatment. Questions? He asked. Bill shook his head. "No, not yet," he said. The doctor pressed a button on his phone before standing up. "Okay," he said when the orderly returned to the office. "Let's go meet the staff who will be taking care of you, okay?" The orderly followed the doctor, pushing Bill's wheelchair. Finally, they arrived at their destination, which looked like a nurse's station at the side of a long hallway. Four very attractive women in blue medical scrubs stood up as they approached. "Ah, okay, you're all here," Dr. Steiner said. "Let me introduce our guest, Bill Dalton." The women all smiled and greeted him. The doctor introduced each of them to Bill. "This is Angela, your nutritionist," he said. "Ingrid will be your physical therapist," he added, pointing to a short-haired blonde who was clearly working out. "Linda will be your day nurse," the doctor said, pointing to a petite woman with short dark hair. "And this is Gretchen, your night nurse," he said, pointing to a tall blonde who wore her hair in a bun. Her eyes sparkled as she smiled at him. He smiled back. "Okay, ladies, let's get our guests ready. We need to run tests on Mr. Dalton before we put him up for the night," he said. "By the way, Bill," the doctor added, "please feel free to contact us anytime. We all live right here in the center and are available 24 hours a day." The doctor left, and the nurses took Bill to his room, which looked like a suite. Instead of a standard hospital bed, there was a king-size bed with medical equipment attached to the head and sides. The bed faced a huge flat screen that Bill estimated was at least 70 inches. The nurses put his clothes back and put him in a traditional hospital gown. They gave him a glass and took him to the bathroom so he could provide a urine sample. Putting the lid on the glass, he handed it back. After he was put into bed and covered, Linda took tests from him. After that, Linda and Gretchen connected his Roman 4. Linda left after taking some tests to the laboratory. Angela brought Bill's dinner and laid it out on a tray. She took the lid off the plate, and Bill was struck by the aroma of freshly prepared 6-ounce steak and lobster tail with side dishes. He wasn't allowed to drink alcohol, so she poured him a glass of sparkling water. "Bon appetit," she said, kissing him on the cheek before leaving. What a service! Bill's eyes widened and his mouth watered at the sight of the treat in front of him. He picked up the cutlery and unfolded the napkin. Holding the fork, he began to cry. The hospital had cutlery, but it was plastic. It was a real metal fork, the first he had been allowed to hold and use for food in months. It was a small thing, really, but to him it was something he had once taken for granted, but had been denied. Gretchen noticed his reaction and quickly walked over to his bedside. "What happened, Bill?" she asked, sitting down next to him on the bed. "This is a real fork," he said through tears. "Of course it is," she said, confused by his reaction. He looked at her. "You don't understand," he said. "This is the first real fork I've been allowed to use in months." She looked at him, shocked. "What?" she asked. "You mean you weren't allowed to use cutlery? Didn't the hospital have cutlery?" "It was plastic," he said. "This is the real thing." "You weren't allowed to use cutlery at home?" she asked. He shook his head. "Well, how did you eat?" He looked at the floor. She followed his gaze and soon began to understand. "Oh my God, poor man." She held his head while he cried on her shoulder. She let him cry. "Sorry," he said. I don't know what came over me." "It's okay," she said. "We will get rid of all these demons." She kissed his forehead before standing up. "Everything will be okay, Bill, I promise." "Thank you," he said. He continued to eat while she entered notes into the computer. He finished his dinner while Gretchen finished her work. She noticed he was finished and placed the dishes in a tray by the door for the kitchen staff to pick up. She rolled the cart into the hallway and closed the door. "It's almost time for bed," she said. "Do you want to watch TV before bed?" "Yeah, that would be nice," he said. She took the remote and showed him how to use the system. He was amazed by the quality of the picture and sound. This was another thing Sarah had denied him over the past few months. "Can I join you?" Gretchen asked. He didn't expect this. Yes, of course," he said. "This is fine. Won't you get into trouble? I mean, don't you have any other patients?" She smiled and shook her head. "You're my patient and I won't get in trouble," she said. "Why do you think your bed is so big?" He laughed for the first time in a long time. As he watched, Gretchen let her hair down, letting it fall over her shoulders, framing her beautiful face. He had never cheated on Sarah, and the thought of doing it with another woman had never crossed his mind. But he decided Sarah had left the marriage long ago, so he relaxed and enjoyed the moment. To hell with Sarah, he thought. But something was wrong. Horribly wrong. What's wrong with him? Gretchen seemed to sense it. "What happened, Bill?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "Please don't misunderstand me. You are incredibly beautiful. I want you to stay with me. This has never happened to me before. Sorry." She smiled and kissed him again. "It's okay, Bill. We'll get through this. I'll stay here if you want. I'll even spend the night if you want. Would you like this?" she asked. "I would like to," he said. "Are you sure you won't get into trouble?" "Absolutely not," she said. "I have an alarm for 5:30, and I will have to shower and change before Linda gets there. Let's just watch a movie and enjoy each other's company. I'll be here if you want or need anything." "Sounds good," he said. "What kind of films do you have?" "Well," she said, "we have all the standard cable channels, plus we have a huge in-house library of every genre imaginable. I'm sure you like real manly movies, don't you?" "I love all genres, but yeah, I really like classic war films, sci-fi, westerns, that kind of stuff," he said. "It sounds good. Why don't you pick something and we can watch it together?" she said. Bill went through the menu and found a movie he really liked, Windy Talk with Nicolas Cage. "Do you like Nicolas Cage?" he asked. She nodded. He chose a movie, and they lay in each other's arms, enjoying the movie. Turning off the TV, she settled down next to him, and soon both fell asleep. Bill woke up early the next day feeling better than he had in a long time. He looked at Gretchen and thought how beautiful she was this morning. After the shower, she put on a robe and escorted Bill, still hooked up to an Roman 4, to the large bathroom, where he shaved, brushed his teeth, and showered. She laid out clean underpants, a clean robe, and a pair of non-slip hospital slippers for him. He put on his underpants and robe, but needed help with his slippers. She sat him on the bed and put on slippers. By this time, Angela had entered the room with his breakfast, which included an omelet with Denver turkey bacon, toast, and a bowl of oatmeal with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. After watching the news, he ate his entire breakfast in a matter of minutes and was rewarded with a hot cup of coffee. Soon, Dr. Steiner entered the room with Linda. "Good morning, Bill," he said with a smile. "I hope you slept well last night." Bill wondered if the doctor knew that Gretchen had slept in his bed last night, but dismissed the thought. "I slept very well, thank you, Dr. Steiner," he said. The older man nodded vigorously, his smile growing even wider. "Ah, that's good to hear," he said as Linda took his vital signs. "When Linda is finished here, she will take you to your session." He and Gretchen were talking about something, but he didn't hear what they were talking about. Linda seemed to give Bill a knowing smile as she completed her actions and placed him in his wheelchair. "This is it," she said, pushing him down the hall. They entered a darkened room that contained a chair and a fairly large chaise lounge. Dr. Steiner was waiting for them and had just placed the digital audio recorder on the table next to his chair. Bill was seated in a lounge chair and made as comfortable as possible. Dr. Steiner explained what was about to happen. In short, he will put Bill into a deep state of hypnosis and ask questions. Bill should have responded with as much detail as possible. The session will be recorded using both audio and visual devices. Bill was told that he would remember everything that came to his mind during the session, but it would be like watching a movie. After explaining everything, Dr. Steiner began the session, and soon Bill was in a deep trance, answering the doctor's questions and providing many details, many of which he had forgotten. A little over 3 hours later, he was brought back to reality, sweaty, thirsty, and more than a little shaken. He drank water for a long time while Dr. Steiner consulted his notes. "How are you feeling?" asked Dr. Steiner. Bill shook his head. It was like going through a meat grinder, he said. I understand, said the doctor. You seem to have had quite a few repressed memories. I'm going to suggest that you take a course in counseling while you're with us. You can use our consultants or choose someone you feel comfortable with, like Mr. Stimson. Yes, I would like to work with Ralph if possible, Bill said. Dr. Steiner nodded and made a note of this. Very good, he said. I'll call him and set up meetings 3 times a week until we're done. There's just one thing I'd like to know. What exactly? Asked Bill. Are you undergoing gender reassignment treatment? Asked the doctor. No, Bill replied. Why are you asking? Well, your testosterone levels are very low, and in your blood test, we found a drug used in gender transition, Dr. Steiner said. Bill shook his head. I never even thought about it, he said. Well, it seems your wife has made good on her threat to turn you into a woman, Dr. Steiner said. This explains your non-reaction on Gretchen last night. Bill looked at him, shocked. Please do not worry. It's all part of the treatment, but what's important is that I think she really loves you, he added with a smile. You say your wife doesn't work, said the doctor. Do you know how she could have obtained such a drug? She probably got it from that Bruno guy, Bill said. Suddenly, it dawned on him. Wait a minute, he said. She was friends with the woman next door who was arrested for trying to drug her husband. He strained his memory, trying to remember the woman's name. If I'm not mistaken, her name was Renee Warren. Sarah had planned to go on some kind of spa weekend with her a while ago, but said her mother was sick and spent the weekend with her instead. At least that's what she claimed. Was this before or after she threatened to make you a woman? Asked the doctor. Before, Bill said. Interesting, said the doctor. Well, we'll need to adjust your medications. We will need to counteract the effects of what your wife gave you and get your testosterone levels back to normal. I will also let the staff know as we will need to make some adjustments to your treatment plan. Although worried about this turn of events, the doctor was also excited to see how it would affect Bill's treatment. Let's do a basic physical test to see where you are now, the doctor said. I'll ask Ingrid to take care of it. She will make you work. After this, you will have lunch, and then we will do a full body scan. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Bill was taken to the physical therapy room, where Ingrid hooked him up to her computer and put him on the treadmill. She placed him on several devices designed to measure his initial strength. She felt and checked every part of his body after that. After lunch, he was taken to a room with a large scanning device. He lay down on the bed and was led into the car. The giant machine hummed and crackled a little, which made Bill uneasy. Relax, everything is fine, a female voice said through the speakers inside the car. Just breathe normally and hold your breath when I tell you to. Bill took a deep breath and looked around, nervous. Take a deep breath and hold it, the woman said. Bill obeyed. The hum of the machine intensified, and a blue light passed through his body from head to toe, then back again. That's it, said the woman. Bill was taken out, dressed in a robe, and returned to his room. Linda and Gretchen were in the room, talking quietly as they worked on the Roman IV pole next to his bed. He noticed that both women's robes were much shorter than the day before, exposing a lot of legs. They both took care of him and got him ready for bed. It seemed to him that they were deliberately showing themselves to him, but he said nothing and enjoyed the attention. Linda, the smaller of the two women, leaned over him several times, giving him a clear look at the top of her shirt, which had the top 3 buttons undone. She looked at him with a knowing smile before continuing her work. Soon they put him back in bed, connecting him to an Roman IV. We've adjusted your medications, so we'll need to monitor them tonight, Gretchen said. She gave him a small paper cup of pills and a glass of water. You need to accept it, she added. Bill did as she said. What was it? He asked. Mostly vitamins and minerals. Your potassium levels are very low, Gretchen said. Also something to counteract the effects of the transition drug and something to restore testosterone levels. After dinner, Linda said goodbye by kissing Bill on the cheek. Gretchen entered her notes into the computer and adjusted his medication. "Let's watch a movie and get some sleep, okay?" Gretchen said, crawling under the blanket next to him. He dozed off, enjoying the scent of her hair. He woke up several hours later, his body covered in sweat. Gretchen was already awake. "What's happened?" she asked. "You screamed in your sleep. Did you have a dream?" "It's a nightmare," Bill said. "Tell me about him," she said. "That was the night Sarah threatened to turn me into a woman," he said. "Oh God," Gretchen said. "No one will hurt you anymore," she said. "I promise. I will not let." She kissed his face and wiped the tears from his eyes. She knew it was one of the memories his mind was blocking. "It's okay, honey," she said. "Try to sleep. I'll be here with you." He fell asleep in Gretchen's arms, and the two slept until the morning. Early the next morning, Gretchen took a shower with Bill. I could get used to this, Bill thought. Sarah had never showered with him before. Wearing her clothes and only a robe, Gretchen informed Linda of the events of the previous night and kissed Bill. "I'll see you tonight," she said before she left. Dr. Steiner entered the room holding a clipboard in his hands. "Ready to start?" he asked. Bill nodded. "Okay," he said. The doctor outlined his treatment plan for Bill, and so it began. Each day began with an examination that included X-rays, blood tests, and a quick body scan. This was followed by physical therapy with Ingrid, who pushed him to work hard and not take "I can't" for an answer. After a short lunch break, more physical therapy followed. Each session ended with a full-body massage and time spent in the jacuzzi. Ralph came 3 times a week for counseling and to update him on what was happening with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Bill learned from Ralph that local authorities were interested in Bruno, whom they suspected of producing illegal substances. They didn't have hard evidence, but they kept an eye on Bill's house to see what would happen. Ralph also brought a lawyer who began the process of filing for divorce. The lawyer said that based on the material provided to him, there is a possibility that Sarah could face formal charges including assault and spousal abuse. The operative word was may, as local authorities are notorious for failing to take action when needed. The days ended the same way, a night with Gretchen. Several times he felt something he had not felt for a long time, but nothing came of it. 3 weeks passed like this. Then it happened. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said. She smiled. "I hope so," she said, "because I'm falling in love with you too." They kissed each other, and the two fell asleep in each other's arms. The next day, Gretchen and Bill showered together as usual. Linda was waiting for them in the room when they came out of the shower. "Finally, you two are done," she joked. "I thought I'd have to call security to check on you." She gave them a knowing smile as she continued her work. After a morning of tests and physical therapy, Dr. Steiner invited Bill into his office. "I'm very impressed with your results so far," he said. "You've come a long way since you came to us, and I think we're ready to begin treatment." "I'm glad to hear that," Bill said. "I feel better than ever." "Tell me, young man," said the doctor, "what do you think of my niece?" "To your niece?" asked Bill. "Yes, Gretchen." "What do you think of her?" asked Dr. Steiner. "I didn't know she was your niece," Bill said. "Yes, she is my brother's daughter. She moved in with me after her father died in an accident. I helped her graduate from college, and she started working for me here as a researcher. When she read your file, she volunteered to be your night nurse. So tell me what you think of her." "Well, she's very pretty and a great nurse," Bill said. The doctor waved his hand. "I know all this," he said. "But what do you think about her? How about a woman?" "Well, Dr. Steiner," Bill began, "I'm falling in love with her." "Fabulous," exclaimed the doctor, returning to his native German. "She loved you very much too, you know. I think she loves you too. Is there a future for you too?" "I can easily see myself being married to her," Bill said. "This is music to my aging ears," said the doctor. "Now let's get down to business. Today we will prepare you for treatment, and we will start tomorrow morning." After meeting with Dr. Steiner, Ralph and the lawyer showed up for their scheduled visit. "I swear you look like a new man," said Ralph. Bill smiled. "I feel like a new person," he said. After greetings and a short consultation, the lawyer discussed the divorce papers with Bill. They agreed that Sarah would be given notice the next day at home. Bill was later prepped for the procedure, which was to take place early the next day. His hair was cut and his body was shaved. Dr. Steiner explained what would happen during the procedure and warned that he may experience significant pain. That night, his Roman 4 was adjusted to give him the medications he would need the next day. Gretchen made love to him again. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, lying next to him. "You won't lose," Bill said. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Promise me," she said. "I promise," Bill said. "I love you, and as soon as my divorce is finalized, I want to marry you, if you agree." She smiled and hugged him. "Oh yes, I will marry you, Bill. I will make you the happiest person on earth," she said. They made love again before finally falling asleep. The next day, after Gretchen and Bill had showered, she and Linda prepared him for the procedure. Dr. Steiner entered the room to examine him. "Ready to start?" he asked. Everyone agreed, including Bill, who was a little nervous. He was wheeled into the treatment room and Gretchen gave him some medicine, which included something to calm his nerves. She kissed him on the cheek before he was placed naked in a treatment chamber that looked like an old Egyptian sarcophagus with wires and sensors on the sides. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Bill said as the drugs began to take effect. Dr. Steiner approached them. "Remember, you will experience some pain. This is normal and will pass," he said. "That's why we gave you something to relax. It does not take a lot of time. We can see everything from here, and if anything happens, we will get you out immediately. Once we're done, we'll do another scan and make sure everything is okay." The doctor closed the camera and Bill could see his beloved Gretchen through the portrait at eye level. She looked at him, smiling. He smiled back. Suddenly, a bright light flashed, and Bill felt an electric charge run through his body. For a moment, he felt nothing. Then a slight tingling sensation began to spread throughout his body. It seemed that an electric cocoon enveloped his every cell. The pain followed the tingling sensation that covered his head. It hurt, but not as much as he expected. He could still see Gretchen, but it was as if he was looking at her through gauze. It seemed to him that he was in this static cocoon for hours, but in fact it only lasted about 15 minutes. Just as it began, it ended with another bright flash of light. His vision cleared and the pain subsided. He could still see Gretchen looking at him. At least he survived, he thought. Dr. Steiner opened the chamber and examined Bill, nodding in approval. "Very good," he said, switching back to German. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Bill wondered why doctors always ask this question. "I don't know about you, doctor, but other than a slight headache, I feel like $1 million, he said. The doctor nodded. "Let's do a treatment scan after," Dr. Steiner told Gretchen. She walked over to Bill and put him in a hospital gown before taking him to the scan room. After the scan, Dr. Steiner drew blood and performed post-op physical tests. Ingrid was almost delighted when Bill surpassed all the tests. He was returned to the room, and he saw himself naked in full length in the mirror. He developed muscles that he had never seen before. His chest was well-defined, and he even had six-pack abs. His arms and legs also became significantly larger, and everything else was larger than before. He looked at Dr. Steiner. "Is this a beast?" he asked. The doctor shook his head. "No, young man, this is the new you. The beast will manifest itself when you confront the source of your mental restlessness," he said. He turned to his niece, who was looking at Bill with love and admiration. "What do you think of your new man, my dear?" "He's my dream uncle," she said. She walked up to Bill and hugged him. "And I will spend my life with him." The doctor smiled as she kissed Bill. "I think you should look into what brought you here in the first place, Bill," the doctor said. "The sooner, the better. Perhaps this evening." Bill nodded. "I agree," he said, with more confidence and determination than he had ever felt before. "Tonight." "Okay," said Dr. Steiner. "I will arrange transport. Gretchen and I will accompany you there, but you must deal with your own problems. Don't take ID with you. When you are finished, we will return you and conduct a follow-up examination. Now rest while I organize everything." That night, Bill, Dr. Steiner, Gretchen, two security guards, and a driver drove to Bill's neighborhood in an unmarked black van. They drove past the house and saw a dark police sedan parked a few hundred feet from the driveway. There was a light on in the front room, but they could not see anything because the heavy curtains were closed. The rest of the house seemed dark. They walked around the block and parked in an alley near the back gate. Bill put on a pair of gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. "Remember, don't stay too long," Dr. Steiner said. "Do what you need to do and get back as quickly as possible." Bill nodded in agreement. Gretchen kissed him. "Be careful," she said. "And remember, no matter what happens, I love you." "I love you too," Bill said, "and I'll be careful." He got out of the van and headed towards the gate. Opening them slowly, he walked to the back sliding glass door, which, fortunately, was unlocked. He quietly opened the door and entered. The house was dirty and stank of various unpleasant odors. Bill saw Sarah and her lover Bruno. They were surprised by his appearance. Bill started to get angry, but controlled himself. He took off Sarah's wedding and engagement rings, crushed them, and threw them on the floor. Bill then noticed the smell of gas and realized the stove had been turned off. The gas slowly filled the house, creating a dangerous situation. He shouted at Sarah to run and headed for the exit. Sarah ran out of the house and ran to the policeman who was monitoring the place. The policeman put her in the car and headed towards the house, but stopped when the house exploded. Meanwhile, Bill managed to return to the van. Gretchen and Dr. Bethis Steiner put a hospital gown on him as the driver headed back to the research center. Sarah at this time told the policeman about what had happened. The policeman called the fire department and ambulance, believing that Sarah needed psychological help. Gretchen hugged a trembling Bill all the way back to the research center. Dr. Steiner said nothing, deciding to wait for the follow-up examination. When they returned, Bill had already calmed down. They were rushed to the treatment center and thoroughly examined. When the test results came back, Dr. Steiner was pleased. He met Bill and Gretchen in their room. "How are you feeling?" asked Dr. Steiner. Bill nodded. "I'm better now," he said. "A little shocked, but better." "Yes, I can imagine you are a little shocked," the doctor said. "This was probably the first time you really faced something that was making you anxious. I see that you had rapid weight gain, but you seem to have successfully returned to your new normal. And judging by the preliminary results, your body is recovering very well. I think after a week or two of rehabilitation, you will be able to return to work." "Thank you, doctor," Bill said. "What are you planning next?" "I think I'll leave it in Gretchen's capable hands," the doctor said, smiling. "After all, I understand that you have a wedding to plan." Bill looked at Gretchen. "Yes, uncle," she said, "and I have something suitable for our patient." Dr. Steiner smiled and left the room. Gretchen closed the door and looked at Bill. "Are you ready for rehab, honey?" she asked. Bill smiled and nodded. "Any time, honey," he said. Sarah insisted that a giant monster entered her house, killed her lover, and threatened to kill her. She was eventually admitted to a psychiatric ward for observation and was later involuntarily committed to a mental hospital where she spent the rest of her life. Bill's divorce went smoothly, and he married Gretchen, who returned to her role as a researcher. His house was destroyed by fire. Firefighters said the fire started in the kitchen where Sarah and her lover were preparing illegal substances. The cause was a bad gas connector on the stove, but the subsequent fire caused an explosion of dangerous mixtures that destroyed the house. Bill received an insurance payout that was small due to the illegal activity that caused the fire. He sold the site and restored everything he could from the ruins. He moved in with Gretchen, who lived in a small house in the research center. He continued to work for Mike Olson, who benefited greatly from his friend's new confidence. As the doctor predicted, Bill the Beast did not appear again.